The sound I heard on the hill near Trebon was not a lion's roar, but I felt it in my chest the same way. It was a grunt, deeper than a lion's roar, closer to the sound of thunder in the distance. Another branch broke, almost on the crest of the hill. I looked in that direction and saw a huge shape dimly lined by the firelight. I felt the ground shudder slightly under my feet. Denna turned to look at me, her eyes wide with panic. I grabbed hold of her arm and ran toward the opposite side of the hill. Denna kept up with me at first, then planted her feet when she saw where I was headed. "Don't be stupid," she hissed. "We'll break our necks if we run down that in the dark." She cast around wildly, then looked up at the nearby greystones. "Get me up there, and I'll haul you up after." I laced my fingers together to make a step. She put her foot into it, and I heaved so hard I almost threw her into the air where she could catch the edge of the stone. I waited a brief moment until she swung her leg up, then I slung my travel sack over my shoulder and scrambled up the side of the massive stone. Rather, I should say, I scrambled at the side of the massive stone. It was worn smooth by ages of weather and didn't have any handholds to speak of. I slid to the ground, my hands scrabbling ineffectually. I bolted to the other side of the arch, hopped up onto one of the lower stones and made another leap. I hit the rock hard, all along the front of my body, knocking the wind out of me and banging my knee. My hands gripped at the top of the arch, but I couldn't find any purchase. Denna caught me. If this was some heroic ballad, I would tell you how she clasped my hand firmly and pulled me to safety. But the truth is, she got hold of my shirt with one hand while the other made a tight fist in my hair. She hauled hard and kept me from falling long enough for me to catch a grip and scramble to the top of the stone with her. As we lay there, panting, we peered over the edge of the stone. Down on the hilltop, the dim shape was beginning to move into the circle of our firelight. Half hidden in the shadows, it looked larger than any animal I had ever seen, big as a loaded wagon. It was black, with a massive body like a bull's. It came closer, moving in an odd shuffle, not like a bull or a horse. The wind fanned the fire, causing it to flare up, and I saw it carried its thick body close to the ground, legs out to the side like a lizard. When it came farther into the light, the comparison was impossible to avoid. It was a huge lizard, not long like a snake. It was squat like a cinder brick, its thick neck blending into a head shaped like a massive flat wedge. It covered half the distance from the crest of the hill to our fire in a single, spastic burst of speed. It grunted again, deep like rumbling thunder, and I felt it in my chest. As it came closer, it moved past the other grey stone that lay in the grass, and I realized my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. It was bigger than the grey stone. 6 feet high at the shoulder, 15 feet long, big as a horse cart, massive as a dozen bulls tied together. It moved its thick head back and forth, working its wide mouth open and closed, tasting the air. Then there was a burst of blue flame. The sudden light of it was blinding, and I heard Denna cry out beside me. I ducked my head and felt a wash of heat roll over us. Rubbing at my eyes, I looked down again and saw the thing move closer to the fire. It was black, scaled, massive. It grunted again like thunder, then bobbed its head and breathed another great gout of billowing blue fire. It was a dragon. In the Waystone Inn, Kvothe paused expectantly. The moment stretched out until Chronicler looked up from his page. "I'm giving you the opportunity to say something," Kvothe said. "Something along the lines of, 'That can't be,' or 'There's no such thing as dragons.'" Chronicler wiped the nib of his pen clean. "It's not really my place to comment on the story," he said placidly. "If you say you saw a dragon—" He shrugged. Kvothe gave him a profoundly disappointed look. This from the author of The Mating Habits of the Common Draccus. This from Devon Lockheys, the great debunker. This from Devon Lockheys, who agreed not to interrupt or change a single word of the story he is recording. Chronicler lay his pen down and massaged his hand. Because those were the only conditions under which he could get access to a story he very much desired. Quoth gave him a level look. Have you ever heard the expression, white mutiny? I have, Chronicler said with a thin smile. I could say it, Reshi, Bast said brightly. I haven't agreed to anything. Quoth looked back and forth between them, then sighed. There are few things as nauseating as pure obedience, he said. Both of you would do well to remember that. He gestured for Chronicler to pick his pen up again. Very well. It was a dragon. It's a dragon, Denner whispered. Telu Holden over Rolus, it's a dragon. It's not a dragon, I said. There's no such thing as dragons. Look at it, she hissed at me. It's right there. Look at the huge goddamn dragon. It's a Draccus, I said. It's goddamn huge, Denner said with a tinge of hysteria in her voice. It's a goddamn huge dragon, and it's going to come over here and eat us. It doesn't eat meat, I said. It's an herbivore. It's like a big cow. Denner looked at me and started to laugh. Not hysterical laughter, but the helpless laughter of someone who's just heard something so funny they can't help but bubble over with it. She put her hands over her mouth and shook with it. The only sound was a low huffing that escaped through her fingers. There was another flash of blue fire from below. Denner froze mid-laugh, then took her hands away from her mouth. She looked at me, her eyes wide, and spoke softly with a slight quaver in her voice. We had both gone from terrified to safe so quickly that we were close to laughing from sheer relief anyway. So when she convulsed with laughter again, muffling it with her hands, I started to laugh too, my belly shaking as I tried not to make any noise. We lay there like two giggling children, while below us the great beast grunted and snuffed around our fire, occasionally sending up gouts of flame. After a long several minutes, we regained control of ourselves. Denner wiped tears away from her eyes and drew a deep, shaky breath. She slid closer to me until the left side of her body was pressed close up against my right. Listen, she said softly as we both looked over the edge of the stone. That thing does not graze, she said. It's huge. It could never get enough food. And look at its mouth. Look at those teeth. Exactly. They're flat, not pointed. It eats trees, whole trees. Look at how big it is. Where could it possibly find enough meat? It would have to eat 10 deer every day. There's no way it could survive. She turned her head to look at me. How the hell do you know this? I read about it at the university, I said. A book called The Mating Habits of the Common Draccus. It uses the fire in a mating display. It's like a bird's plumage. You mean that thing down there, she groped for words, her mouth working silently for a moment, is going to try and top our campfire? She looked for a moment as if she was going to burst into laughter again, but she drew a deep, shuddering breath instead, regaining her composure. That's something I have to see. We both felt a shudder in the stone underneath us, coming up from the ground below. At the same time, things grew noticeably darker. Looking down, we saw the Draccus rolling in the fire like a hog in a wallow. The ground shook as it wriggled around, crushing the fire underneath itself. That thing must weigh, Denner stalled out, shaking her head. Maybe 5 tons, I guessed. 5 at least. It could come and get us. It could push over these stones. I don't know about that, I said, slapping the stone under my hand, trying to sound more certain than I really was. These have been here for a long time. We're safe. While rolling in our overlarge campfire, The Draccus had scattered burning branches around the top of the hill. It now wandered to where a half-charred log lay smouldering in the grass. The Draccus snuffed, then rolled, crushing the log into the earth. Then it came back to its feet, snuffed the log again, and ate it. It didn't chew, it bolted the log whole, like a frog getting a cricket down into its gullet. It did this several times, moving in a circle around the now largely extinguished fire. It snuffed, rolled on the burning pieces, then ate them after they were extinguished. "That makes sense, I suppose," Degas said, watching it. "It starts fires and lives in the woods. If it didn't have something in its head that made it want to put out fires, it wouldn't survive very long." "That's probably why it came here," I said. "It saw our fire." After several minutes of snuffing and rolling, the Draccus came back to the flat bed of coals that was all that remained of our fire. It circled it a few times, then walked over it, and lay down. I cringed, but it just shifted back and forth like a hen settling into a nest. The hilltop below was now entirely dark, except for the pale moonlight. "How can I never have heard of these things?" Degas asked. "They're very rare," I said. "People tend to kill them because they don't understand they're relatively harmless, and they don't reproduce very quickly. That one down there is probably 200 years old, about as big as they get." I marveled at it. "I bet there aren't more than a couple of 100 Draccus that size in the whole world." We watched for another couple of minutes, but there was no movement from below. Degas gave a jaw-popping yawn. "Oh, God, I'm exhausted. There's nothing like the certain knowledge of your own death to tucker you out." She rolled over onto her back, then onto her side, then back facing towards me, trying to get comfortable. "Lord, it's cold up here," she shivered visibly. "I can see why it's cuddled up on our fire." "We could go down and get the blanket," I suggested. She snorted. "Not likely." She shivered visibly, wrapping her arms around her chest. "Here." I stood up and took off my cloak. "Wrap up in this. It's not much, but it's better than the bare stone." I held it out to her. "I'll watch you while you sleep and make sure you don't fall off." She stared at me for a long moment, and I half expected her to beg off. But after a moment she took it and wrapped it around herself. "You, Master Quoth, certainly know how to show a girl a good time." "Wait until tomorrow," I said. "I'm just getting started." I sat there quietly, trying not to shiver, and eventually Degas's breathing leveled off. I watched her sleep, with the calm contentment of a boy who has no idea of how foolish he is, or what unexpected tragedies the following day will bring.